Chapter 7a, Negative 2 Commands. Step 1. Start with the yo form of the verb. Step 2. Drop the o. Step 3. Flip the ending. For an AR verb, you will change it to an E. For an ER-IR verb, you will change it to an A. And step 4. Add an S. Chapter 7a, Grammar Point. Things to watch out for when doing negative 2 commands. If the verb is a go verb, it's a go verb in the command form also. Tener in the yo form is tango. No tangas, that is in the to form. Hacer is yo hago, which would be no hagas. Traer is yo traigo, which would be no traigas. Venir is yo vengo, which would equal no vengas. Saer is yo saigo, which would be no saigas. And salir is yo saligo, which would be no saligas. Chapter 7a, Grammar Points. Another thing to watch out for when doing negative 2 commands. If the verb ends in car, gar, or zar, it will have a spelling change in the negative 2 command. If the verb ends in car, the C that is there in car will change to a QU. If the verb ends in gar, the G that is there will change to a GU. And if the verb ends in zar, then the Z that is there will change to a C. Chapter 7a, Grammar Points. The final thing you need to watch out for when doing negative 2 commands is that there are 4 verbs that are totally irregular in the negative 2 command. Ser will change to no seas in the to form. Ir will change to no vias in the to form, not yayas. Dar will change to no des in the 2 command, and estar will change to no estes. And also, watch out for boot verbs because they are still boot verbs in the negative 2 command. When doing negative 2 commands in Chapter 7a, you'll take the verb and you would drop the ER, put it in the yo form, which would be como, and then you would add an A instead of the O because you flip the ER-IR or an AR to an AR, and then you would add an S. So, comer, which means eat, would be comas. No comas! And correr, which means run, would be corras. 1, 2, 3.
No corras!
Dormir, which means sleep, is a boot verb. So you would change the O to a UE and it would be duermas. No duermas!
Chapter 6b, Grammar Point. Verbs that use indirect object pronouns. This will be a 2-part verb that will include an indirect object pronoun and the conjugation of the verb. Reminder, do not conjugate the verb based on the indirect object pronoun. Part 1, the indirect object pronouns are me, te, le, nos, and les. The second part is the conjugation of the verb. Chapter 6b, Grammar Point continued. You may be asking yourself when you're doing this, which verb ending do I use? We'll be using the present tense verb endings in this grammar concept. So the AR verbs, you're going to be using a and on. And in the ER and IR verbs, you're going to be using a and n. Most sentences will follow this format. Indirect object pronoun plus the verb and then the subject. Chapter 6b, Grammar Point continued. In this chapter, we're also going to be learning about the present perfect verbs. It's a 2-part verb. The first part is the conjugation of haber in the present tense, which is as, amos, and an. The second part is the past participle form of the verb. For AR verbs, you drop the AR and add ado into the end. For the ER and IR verbs, you drop the ER-IR and add edo to the end. Today we'll be learning the conjugation of verbs in the present tense. It's a 2-part verb, and the first part is the conjugation of haber for the subject of the verb. For this one, Caleb's truck is a singular item, so you will use a. And for romper, which means to break, it's an irregular verb, and it changes to roto.
Oh no! It's broke!
Roto. For the second one, Coco will be be just a singular person, so you will also use a. And morir, which is also irregular, you will change it to muerto.
Oh no, she died.
Muerto. And for the last one, Caleb, which is a singular thing, you will also use a. And the last one, correr, which it is not irregular, so you just add an IDO to the end, so it will be corrido. Corrida. Irregular past participles. Decir turns to dicho, hacer turns to hecho, escribir turns to escrito, volver turns to vuelto, devolver turns to devuelto, caer turns to caído, creer turns to creído, traer turns to trido, leer turns to leído, oír turns to oído, morir turns to muerto, poner turns to puesto, ver turns to visto, and romper turns to roto. Also, if the verb is reflexive and ends in se, then you have to put the reflexive pronoun that matches the subject first. Me, te, se, nos, or se.
Boom.